Good morning, class. Today we're going to review domain and range for each graph. When we were talking about domain and range, just to kind of quick review, domain is my x values. And since you know your x-axis goes from left to right, when we talk about domain, we're going to go from the leftmost point to the furthest right point. Our range are our y values. And our y-axis goes up and down. So we're going to go from low to high. And again, domain, we're going to go from left to right. We are going to write this in interval notation. So anytime we have a solid point, I'm going to use a bracket. If you have an open circle, or infinity, we're going to use parentheses. Now we're going to be very specific about whether it's positive or negative infinity. If something is an arrow, that means it's representing infinity, so we'd use a parentheses. Hey, when we're looking at the graph, I could ask you, hey, go from left to right, up and down. It's easier for you to see it as a visual. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a rectangle from my left side on my right side. Oops. Down to the lowest point, up at the highest point. Okay, so that when I come here and I ask about the domain, we know domain is our x values. And our x-axis goes sideways, left and right. So I'm going to look at my left side of my rectangle, and on the left side of my rectangle, it touched at an open circle. And that open circle was at -3 on the x-axis. On the right-hand side of my rectangle, it's here at 4, but notice it's got a arrow that ended it. So that means it's representing that it's going to keep on going, and I need to use infinity. So had an open circle on the left, that means I'm going to have a parentheses. Keeps going to positive infinity on the right, so I'm going to use parentheses. And this is positive infinity that it keeps going towards on the right. Now for the range are my y values. My y-axis goes from low to high. So starting with the lowest point, down here on my graph, it touched the y-axis at -4. But then the highest point, the top of my rectangle, it has an open circle here, has an arrow here, tells me it's going to keep going. So I want to keep going to up to positive infinity. Now, got to decide on brackets or parentheses. This point was a solid point, so I want a bracket next to the -4, and next to infinity, I always use a parentheses. Okay, so let's try another one. Problem number 2. First, I'm going to draw my rectangle. Again, left side. Okay, for my domain are my x values, and we know the x-axis goes sideways, so I'm looking on my left rectangle, and it touches at an arrow. So if it touches at an arrow, that means it's touching at infinity, but because it's on the left side, it's going towards negative infinity. On the right side of my rectangle, I have another arrow, so that tells me arrow means infinity. And it's going towards the right. We're on the right side, so it has to be heading towards positive infinity. And next to infinity, I'm going to put parentheses. Now what about my range, my y values? I'm looking top and bottom, so I'm starting on the bottom. The bottom, it's touching the bottom of my rectangle with a arrow, so I have infinity. It's going down, means negative infinity. And touching the top of my rectangle, I have a arrow, so that tells me that's another infinity, and because that arrow is pointing up, it's positive. So again, my parentheses. Looking at problem number 3. On problem number 3, draw your rectangle. Okay, so starting with the domain are my x values. Where did it touch the left side of my rectangle? Touched at an arrow, so that would give me infinity. And because it's the left side, it's going to be negative infinity. Now on the right side, I know it's hard to see, but it touched an open circle, and this line touches my x-axis at positive 3. So we're talking about positive 3. This is as far as it goes. And when I try to decide, hey, am I going to have a solid or, a rectangle, that's still not right, bracket, square bracket, or parentheses, if I have an open circle or infinity, I use my parentheses. So here's infinity, there's a parentheses, and over here on the right hand side there was an open circle, so I need a parentheses. For my range, we go from low to high. So the lowest point, when I ask about lowest point, I'm talking about the bottom of my rectangle here, touches that open circle, but where is the open circle at on the y-axis? It's at -1. And then at the top, what's happening? It's touching at an arrow, so I need infinity. And since it's my high point going up, it's going to be positive infinity. Again, this was an open circle, so I'm going to put parentheses and parentheses by infinity. Problem number 4. Drawing my rectangle. Okay, domain. We're going to go from left to right. So on the left side, I'm over here at -3, and on the right side, it's at +4. Both of them ended with open circles. I know it's hard to see because I kind of wrote over it, but we had an open circle here, open circle here. So open circle is parentheses. When I talk about my range, we're going to go from low to high. So my bottom of my rectangle touched at an open circle, but where was that on the y value? That is at -1 on the y value. And how high did it go? It went to +4 on my y value. Again, open circle, parentheses, open circle here, parentheses. Problem number 5. Wow, jumped quick. Here is my lowest point. Here is the left side. Here's the top. Here's my right side. Okay, again, when we're asking for a domain, you want to go from left to right. Where did it touch the left of my rectangle? It touched it right here. And this is at -3 on my x. Where does it touch the rectangle on the right hand side? Touched it down here at 2. Now my end point on the left side was a solid, so that means I need a bracket. The end point on the right side was an open circle, so I need a parentheses. For my range, go from low to high. The lowest point is this point here. That's where it touches the bottom of my rectangle, and the bottom of my rectangle is at -5. The highest point is up here, the top of my rectangle, and that is at +2. Now let's make sure we get our parentheses and brackets correct. Open circle at the bottom meant parentheses. This is a solid point on that parabola, so I need a bracket by the 2. Problem number 6, draw in your rectangle. Okay, and now for my values. Touching my left side of my rectangle is an arrow, so that means I want infinity, and it's going to the left, so that's -infinity. Touching the right side of my rectangle is an arrow, that means I have infinity, and since it's going to the right, that's going to be +infinity. And next to infinity is always parentheses. The bottom of my rectangle, touching at the bottom of my rectangle for my for my range, this point here on my y value, this point here my y value is 0, and then this is the highest point, touches the top of my rectangle at an arrow, that means infinity, and so if it's the highest point, it's going to go to +infinity. Now, at 0, this is a solid point, so I have a square bracket. Infinity is always parentheses. I hope you're catching on. We're going to skip over number 8, and we're going to go straight, we're skipping over number 7, going straight to number 8. On number 7, draw my rectangle around. Okay, again, further my left side of my rectangle, it touched at an arrow, so it tells me I have infinity, and it's the left side, so it's going to -infinity. The right side, it's touching right here at +2. This is the 2 value of my x. Okay, next to infinity, I always have parentheses. And that was an open circle, so I need a parentheses by the 2. For my range goes from low to high. Low, again, is that arrow, so low point is -infinity, and we're going up to this point. This is my open circle. This point here is my highest point, and it is at this time 0 on the y. Here's my y-axis. It went through 0 on the y. Again, parentheses next to infinity, and because that was an open circle, I'm going to have parentheses next to that 0. Problem number 9, last one. Rectangle around it. Oops. There we go. From left to right. Furthest point on the left side of my rectangle, goes through -3, and it had an open circle. Point on the right is +3. Open circle, parentheses. This wasn't an open circle, so that means I need a bracket next to the +3. My range, from low to high. This is my lowest point, but on the y value, that lowest point's at -2. This open circle here was my highest point, and on my y's, it crossed at 3. Open circle gives me parentheses, parentheses. Good luck, students. Now it's time for your assignment.